Hi there! In this video, I'm going to extend the 4-floor elevator project which was implemented in the previous video. I want to connect an HMI to my PLC to monitor the 4-floor elevator system. Okay, this is my design screen. Let me explain its main parts. First, these 4 buttons can be used to select each floor. These numbers illustrate the cabin's floor, and if you remember, the cabin should be stopped 5 seconds at each floor. During this time, the related door will be open on the HMI screen. Also, based on the cabin's floor, one of these 4 indicators will be green. Finally, these arrows display the direction of the cabin's movement. Alright, let me continue the video with this project in SIMATIC Manager, which was explained in the previous video. Note that I'm going to explain only added settings and program codes related to my HMI. Let me start with the hardware configuration. Okay, in my hardware configuration, I've enabled the second port of my CPU to make a connection between my PLC and HMI. Remember, the first one was connected to the SIMATIC Manager software installed on my computer. Let me double-click on the second port. As you see, a network was created before. Otherwise, you can click on New button to create a new network. Okay, any networks can be selected to see or change its settings. For example, this value was selected as the transmission rate in my network. Or my PLC address number is 2. Note that each device inside a network has a unique address. Now let me save the hardware settings and then explain all changes in my program codes. As you know, PLC starts its work from OB100. Let me open it. Inside this block, I only added this part to reset these memories which were used inside the other functions. As you know, after OB100, OB1 will be executed continuously. Let me open it. As you see, a new function, FC2, has been added to my previous program. It prepares some data which should be displayed on the HMI. Also, I've changed the first network FC1 a little. First, let's open FC2. As you see, the second function includes 2 networks. The first one stores the cabin's position, which is a number between 0 and 4 on this memory, MW30. This address was used inside my HMI to display the cabin's position. Well, inside the second network, these memories have been connected to these 4 doors on the HMI screen. For example, if the cabin reaches the second floor, it will be stopped 5 seconds by one of these 2 timers. So this bit of my PLC memory will be enabled when the cabin must be stopped 5 seconds at the second floor. Now let's open the first function, FC1. Remember, it was explained in the previous video. Okay, inside the first function, I've only added these 4 addresses below these 4 inputs. Note that I've connected these bits of my PLC memory to these 4 buttons on the HMI screen. So I can use the 4 buttons to call any floor like these 4 inputs which were tested in the previous video. Alright, I've explained all changes inside the SIMATIC Manager project. Now let me run my PLC and test the project. After that, I'll tell you important points about my screen and also how a simple screen can be designed by PM-Designer software. As you know, when I start my PLC, the cabin should go to the first floor in the beginning. If you remember from the previous video, the first input detects whether the cabin reaches the first floor or not. Let me enable it. Now the cabin is located on the first floor and the elevator system is ready to be used. Let me call the second floor using my push buttons, and also I can select the third floor, for example, using the design buttons on the screen. Now let me zoom in on my HMI screen because the PLC program was tested in the previous video. Alright, the cabin is located on the first floor, and if you remember, I selected the second and third floors, and now the cabin is moving up. Okay, the cabin has reached the third floor. Now let me count the other floors. As you see, now the cabin is moving down. First, it must go to the second and first floor, and then go to the fourth floor. Now inside the SIMATIC Manager software, let me open the second function, FC2, to see its relationship with the HMI screen. As I mentioned before, it just prepares some data which should be displayed on the HMI screen. Okay, let's continue. Well, the first network of the second function stores the cabin's position number on MW30, which was connected to these numeric displays. Okay, the next network determines the first 5 seconds that the cabin must be stopped at each floor. Okay, I've tested my HMI screen, and now let me tell you important points about that. My HMI can be programmed by PM-Designer software. First of all, I've connected these buttons to these addresses which were used to call a floor inside the first function FC1. Also, this numeric display, which can be added from here, is connected to this memory, MW30, which includes the cabin's position. These two arrows are connected to Q0.7 and Q0.6 to display the direction of the cabin's movement. As you know, a bit of memory has only two modes, on or off. As you see, I can determine color, text, or picture for each mode inside the Properties window. For example, I selected a black and green arrows to display the Q0.6 is on or off. Remember, this digital output moves up the cabin. Overall, other objects can be added into the screen and also can be connected to others. Now, let me create a simple project to explain how my HMI can be programmed and connected to my PLC from the first step. As you see, I need to write a name for my new project. After that, I'll determine my HMI model. Well, in this window, I'm going to create a link between my HMI and PLC. As you know, I'm using a S7300 CPU of Siemens company. Now I can modify the created links parameters. For example, if you remember, inside the SIMATIC Manager software, I selected this transmission rate for my PLC whose address number was 2. Now, if I click on the Finish icon, the new project will be created. Note that if I click on the link icon on the left side, the connection settings between my HMI and PLC can be adjusted. Also, I can use the internal memory of my HMI. Now, let me add a button. I wanna connect it to an internal memory of my HMI. Okay, let me change some graphical properties. Now let me add a bit RAM to my screen and connect it to the bit of my HMI memory which was used for the button. In consequence, this button will be able to turn on the inserted bit RAM because both of them have been connected to the same address. Well, to test the created link between my HMI and PLC, let me use a numeric display and then connect it to MW30 of my S7300 PLC through the created link. Remember, MW30 indicates the cabin's position. Now let's compile the design screen and then transfer it to my HMI via its USB port. Okay, as you see, I can only set on the bit lamp using the button. Let me go to the PM-Designer software and change the operation mode of the inserted button to momentary on. Now, again, let me compile and transfer the design screen. Okay, my HMI screen has been transferred. Let me test the button and bit lamp. Now let me change the cabin's position to check the created connection between my PLC and HMI. Alright, I added an HMI to the 4-floor elevator project, which was implemented in the previous video. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks so much for watching.